Hello everyone, I'm Morgan Mott, and the disability I chose for my presentation is dyscalculia. My hook for this lesson comes from one of my favorite shows, Degrassi, The Next Generation. If you are familiar with this show, you know that the kids at Degrassi Community School experienced just about every hardship you can imagine. One of those hardships being dyscalculia. This is a show was where I first heard of dyscalculia when the character Liberty was diagnosed with it.
Dyscalculia?
It's a learning disorder, like dyslexia, but with numbers. I've been really upset about it. Mr. Armstrong's been helping me.
Dyscalculia?
Liberty Van Zant is known for being awkward, nerdy, shy, and the smartest girl in school. She may have even been considered twice exceptional, since she is highly intelligent, an overachiever, and a perfectionist. I took note of the mention of dyscalculia in this scene because, like Liberty, I struggled to get higher than a C in math throughout high school. Math struggles may be something many people can relate to. According to a 2011 study done in the UK, nearly half of adults only have the mathematical knowledge of an elementary school student, with 20% of the population having difficulties so severe that they interfere with their everyday tasks involving numbers. However, this does not mean that 20% of the UK has dyscalculia. It can be very difficult to differentiate developmental dyscalculia from typical difficulty excelling in math, even in areas where children attend school regularly. In low or middle income countries, where resources are limited and access to education is limited, it may be much harder to identify dyscalculia. Unlike its counterpart dyslexia, dyscalculia is considerably underdiagnosed, underfunded, and often misunderstood. Between 2000 and 2010, the U.S. National Institute of Health allocated $107.2 million to dyslexia research, but just $2.3 million to dyscalculia. It is reported that around 3 to 7% of people worldwide live with dyscalculia. However, it is widely underdiagnosed. Like all specific learning disorders, it exists on a spectrum of severity. Students who excel in other subjects but struggle in math are less likely to be assessed since math is widely regarded as a difficult subject. While math is notoriously difficult, as teachers, it is important for us to be able to tell if a student is struggling with content because it is new to them or if they are struggling as a result of a disability that did not allow them to build foundational math skills as small children, so they have nothing to build new knowledge upon. This lesson will teach important facts about dyscalculia to give better to give a better understanding of the learning disability. Developmental dyscalculia is categorized by the IDEA as a specific learning disorder, or SLD. An SLD is a disorder in which one or more of a student's basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using spoken or written language is impaired. In the case of dyscalculia, students have an unusually hard time understanding basic math principles. Children and adults with dyscalculia have difficulty performing everyday tasks, including but not limited to telling time, following recipes, interpreting charts, managing personal finances, and making sense of medication dosages or nutrition labels. SLDs are caused by a range of factors that can stem from neurological, genetic, environmental, or psychological origin. Neurologically, people with dyscalculia may have a smaller or less active parietal lobe, or a damaged one in the case of acquired dyscalculia. In most cases, it has been found that acquired dyscalculia results from brain damage to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is an essential part of the brain for developing math skills because it is the primary location for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic processing, three important sensory skills utilized when doing math. In contrast to developmental dyscalculia, those with acquired dyscalculia may only lose the ability to do multiplication, for example, while keeping other mathematical skills they developed over the years. As with other SLDs, it is difficult to define all its characteristics because it manifests differently across people. However, there are prevalent signs and characteristics of dyscalculia that can be seen as early as 2 to 4 years old, when students first learn to count and to use numbers. Individuals with developmental dyscalculia show differences in brain function compared to their typically developed peers. Some studies have shown that individuals with dyscalculia, on average, have smaller or less active parietal lobes. However, after being given help in math, extra help in math, the students' parietal lobes showed similar activation patterns as typical children. The current evidence on differences in brain function between those with and without dyscalculia is still conflicting and not completely conclusive. However, since it is classified as an SLD, it is known that it is not the result of low IQ, sensory impairments like blindness, or lack of educational opportunity. Further support for the theory that the parietal lobe is involved in dyscalculia comes from the observation that individuals develop acquired dyscalculia after sustaining traumatic brain injury to this region of the brain. Individuals with acquired dyscalculia are more likely to have specific impairments, for example, the loss of ability to addition, but not struggling in other areas of math or math-related concepts like multiplication or telling time. Developmental dyscalculia can be present as early as 2 to 4 years old, but not all children receive early intervention, so you may have middle or high schoolers still struggling with the undiagnosed disability. In the classroom, there are a few common signs that students may have dyscalculia. To give a few examples, imagine that dominoes are laid out in front of you on a table. A child with dyscalculia may have trouble counting the dominoes, and once they are counted, they may not be able to keep track of how many are on the table after some have been removed or added without having to recount them all again. They may also have trouble leaving them on the table to count them instead of picking them up one by one. Another characteristic which may affect everyday life the most is that students often struggle with subitizing. This refers to the ability to instantly recognize the quantity of items in a small group without having to count them. For example, if you throw a die down while you're playing a game, you know that you landed on 5 just by glancing at it. But students with dyscalculia are not able to do that. This would be, or may not be able to do that. This would be an example of the disability causing everyday challenges, like playing board games with friends or learning to count by fives or tens with counting blocks, a very common tool used in elementary schools. Since Dyscalculia is an SLD, students will qualify for a 504 plan or an IEP plan based on the severity of their issues. If a student has dyscalculia alone, it is likely they would only need accommodations under a 504. Common accommodations include access to formula sheets or a calculator, as well as extra time on tests. Early intervention, extra tutoring, and tools to help them remember math concepts have been shown to help students keep pace with what their peers are learning. A student may need an IEP if their dyscalculia exists alongside another learning disability. It is possible for a student to have both dyscalculia and its counterpart, dyslexia. Dyslexia is similar to dyscalculia, except that students struggle with reading and spelling. Differentiated and specialized instruction is beneficial for students with SLDs. Using multiple modalities, such as visual and auditory aids, can be an effective way to accommodate students with dyscalculia who may struggle to visualize math concepts through instruction alone. Although there is minimal research specifically focused on dyscalculia, there is ample research available on how to support students with SLDs. With dyscalculia, early intervention is the best, but for middle and high schoolers and adults, there are methods for supporting them as they try to tackle harder math concepts. Reducing anxiety around completing math assignments will help students feel confident in their abilities. Also, teaching students methods for counting besides using their fingers, such as tapping, writing the numbers out in the air, or talking through all the problems aloud, are methods for boosting their retention. Reducing math anxiety, agitation, and fear in students is as important as differentiating lessons and providing tools for assistance. Teachers should make the most of a student's mistakes and encourage them to reframe the mistakes as a growth mindset instead of allowing them to cause frustration, anxiety, and avoidance of math altogether. These are some resources for teachers and parents I found online. Dyscalculia Checklist is a website that offers free quiz to parents who suspect their child has dyscalculia. There are also paragraphs that explain how kinesthetic, auditory, and visual processing, which are all controlled by the parietal lobe, are essential senses needed for building math skills. Classroom Accommodations for Dyscalculia gives tips for teachers on ways to make it easier for their students to learn math, and a guide for parents is a blog that has a helpful overview of what dyscalculia is and its characteristics based on the student's age. While I still think math is a daunting subject, this research project on dyscalculia has shown me that with proper support, resources, and learning methods, it is possible to improve or overcome severe or persistent math difficulties. And as teachers, we should give students as much support as they need in getting the results that they want in math. I'd like to conclude by sharing a photo of one of my math tests from junior year of high school. I worked very, very hard to get this 100%. It is the only math test I've ever gotten an A on in my entire life, and I kept it all this time. This is proof that whatever resources, extra time, or help it takes, we can make it through.